Well, hello, and welcome to week 82, book 82. This time we have A Man on the Moon by Andrew Chaikin. This is something of a sequel for me to the book I read, um, let's see, week 75, Shoot for the Moon by James Donovan. Um, they're not direct sequels, of course. Donovan dealt with Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo up to Apollo 11. This deals with strictly the Apollo missions, Apollo 1 through 17. Although, like a lot of books, it skips through quickly the ones that were unmanned. So, this is a fabulous book. This is um, he interviewed something like 140 people when he wrote it and interviewed every surviving astronaut. He interviewed their wives. He interviewed as many people in the office and in the administration of NASA as he could. He interviewed people in Grumman and American and other uh, companies that provided the technologies and worked on the rover and the lander and the boosters and everything else. So it is about as documented as something could possibly be. And let me tell you this, I'm not reading these specifically for proof that we went to the moon. I know we did. But if you were looking for proof, there's no better thing to do than read these books because the level of detail in here. Chaikin is either one of the world's best science fiction authors ever, or this really happened. And the reason why I say that is because of the incredible detail of various little small things. Like um, at one point, for one of the astronauts, they couldn't get the urine out of their suit, and so they were very slowly uh, uh, drowning in urine. Not specifically drowning, but their whole suit was full of it because they couldn't expel it correctly. And things like that that you would never think to be a part of this kind of thing. That as heroic as what these men did was, it was also very human and very degrading. At one point, it's compared to spending a week in a locker room or a bathroom with two other men, and that's kind of what the circumstance was. Um, he goes into some detail about how they dealt with the waste and that kind of thing. But that's not the only kind of detail that matters here. It's also the technological details of the firing, about the escape velocities, about the orbital mechanics, um, about everything that matters, everything going on. And it really was kind of a miracle that we never lost any astronauts in the Apollo missions. We did lose uh, three astronauts on Apollo 1. It blew up on the landing pad. Well, the whole thing didn't blow up. The capsule caught on fire because of a poorly constructed piece of wiring, and because the hatch was designed to where it couldn't be opened quickly. And those three astronauts died, and everything in the capsule was then made fireproof, which turned out probably to have saved lives at least one other mission, where if it hadn't been fireproof, there's a very good chance things would have caught fire. And those three astronauts, Gus Grissom, let's see, I should name them. Gus Grissom was one of them. Um, who was the other two? Gus Grissom was the most famous of the three. He died in January 27, 1967, of the flash fire inside the Apollo 1 command module during a practice countdown. Right. And the other two people were me a second here. Edward Higgins White II, Ed White, um, the exact same fire, the exact same problem. Um, and the third one was Roger Bruce Chaffee. Those are the three that passed away that day. And it's absolutely amazing that they're the only three astronauts that died actually in any way connected to a mission. There were some very close calls. Apollo 11, the one where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin got to the moon, and the dynamic between those two is kind of fascinating. But that one, there was a 1201 and 1202 error. They were both as they were going down to the moon, and they didn't know what that was. And the way that NASA worked was they had every error code that they expected to in a book, and this was an unexpected error. What this error meant is that the computer, which is about as complicated as what you might find in an electronic toothbrush today, the computer that they used uh, was being asked by Buzz to calculate some information dealing with how far away the ground was, the gravity or something like that, with the moon. And it was overloading the circuits. It was too much at one time. And so the computer had to reset. And then it did it again. And so that is one of the reasons why Neil eventually ended up piloting the Eagle down by himself. Uh, he landed 400 feet away from where he was supposed to be. Or maybe it was 4 miles from where he was supposed to be. Anyway, he landed a significant, I think it was 4 miles from where he was supposed to be. And that was because of a slight inaccuracy in one firing somewhere along the way that put them just a little further to one side than the other. And with this other error that they had, the computer couldn't adjust correctly, or something like that. Anyway, as we know, the Eagle landed and Neil stepped off and said his great famous line. He meant to say, "This is one small step for a man," because he didn't want it to be, he wanted to de emphasize himself and focus on the larger, uh, this is an accomplishment of the human race, of humanity. And that really is one way to look at it here is Neil Armstrong was not necessarily that important as a human being, as an individual, but as the fact that someone had to be first in humanity. This is a magnificent step that we had finally managed to get to the moon. Now, some people may question how quickly we managed to make it to the moon after all the errors and all the problems that they had in Mercury and Gemini and in the early Apollo. Well, here's the thing. Going from the orbit of the Earth to the orbit of the moon, that's pretty simple. That is not much more complicated than um, calculating a simple vector. And the safety of the astronauts there is actually probably higher than for seamen in a submarine under the ocean, given all the heavy pressure of that water above them. So those were engineering and mechanical problems that were not too difficult for the Apollo mission to figure out. There were some problems dealing with heat. Remember, the sun's here, and so this side of the capsule is getting 400 degrees hot, and this side's getting 400 degrees cool. So they had to rotate the capsule so that the components on this side wouldn't freeze and the components on this side wouldn't boil. But other than that, once they got out of Earth orbit uh, and were headed towards lunar orbit, things were not that difficult. they'd already practiced rendezvous and that kind of thing. So the lander coming back, the lander leaving and coming back to the command module was not a very complicated process for them to figure out either. They'd already had practice doing that and they knew what they were doing. And then landing on the moon. Landing on the moon, that was the big one because none of the Apollo missions landed on Earth. I don't know if you realize this, but that was actually the newest part. And they had to accomplish this 200 some odd miles away from the Earth alone. Three men alone with the technology had to figure out how to land something on the moon. And the gravity of the moon was known, of course, and the composition of the moon was pretty strongly known. Where they were headed was pretty well known. They did discover at some point in the early 60s what's called a mascon. I think I mentioned this in the other book too. Massive concentrations, which is places where the gravity on the moon is kind of lumpy, where it is greater than it should be compared to just what one body would be. And that was one of the reasons why some aspects of this were complicated. There are only certain orbits around the moon that are going to be stable because of this. And this was something that was problematic for them until they figured out how to handle it. And that's why on Apollo 12 and 14, 15, 16, and 17, they had such a remarkably easy time with every aspect of spaceflight because Apollo 11 figured it out. And Apollo 12 actually got almost right on top of the money, like 50 feet away from where they were supposed to land or something like that. Just a remarkable close landing. Um, and that's because they worked it out on Apollo 11. So the whole thing here is why did it take them such a difficult time getting up to out orbit and out of orbit in the first place? Why did it take from 1957 with Sputnik all the way to 1967? Why did it take them 10, 12 years to get out of orbit in the first place? Well, the reason for that was because the amount of thrust that you need to get out of Earth's orbit is the most thrust you're going to need the entire way. And so, since you are pressing hard on those rockets for that few minutes burn there, that is when things can go wrong that could explode the whole thing. That's when things can go wrong, catastrophically wrong. And we didn't ever see this in any Apollo mission. We didn't ever see this in any Mercury or Gemini mission either. But the Russians had several things blow up as they were leaving the launch pad, because of this exact problem that they could not figure out a safe way to get their rockets into space. NASA figured it out. Um, and that is why, once they figured that out, that was still the only tricky part. Once they got into orbit is just basically just falling correctly. You fall towards the Earth, but you're also moving so far to the side that as you fall, you keep missing, and you keep falling, you keep missing, you keep falling, you keep missing, you keep falling, you keep missing. And that is what an orbit is. And so this is what they had to do. Here's the moon going over here, and here they are going over around this. What they have to do is they have to jettison out of this orbit, okay, and get out of Earth's gravity. Now, all the way here in Earth's gravity, they're slowing down, slowing down, slowing down. They start at like 20,000 miles an hour, end up at like 5,000 miles an hour because the Earth keeps pulling them slower and slower and slower. And the moon is coming, and they get in the moon's gravity, and then they have to arrange to go around the moon. Okay, so they don't want to hit the moon. They're aiming to go around the moon, and so that's the vector they have to calculate. And it's fascinating stuff. It reads like science fiction if you haven't ever studied this before, but it's real. This is things that people really did. They brought back roughly 480 pounds of moon rocks, and that's the other thing I learned. I did not think about this, but the two main kinds of science that mattered were first of all, physics and orbital mechanics and that kind of thing, and two, geology, because what could they do at the moon? Gather rocks. That's all that's on the moon: dirt and rocks, dirt and rocks, dirt and rocks. And that is the province scientifically of geology. So I did not even realize this before reading this book, but this is a great boon for geologists. Um, and one other thing, why did we quit going to the moon? Well, honestly, after Apollo 11, people lost interest. And think about this. You can name probably Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Can you name any other of the men who went to the moon? Some of you might be able to name the guy who stayed in the capsule and went around the moon, the first person to be on the far side of the moon, totally alone. Some of you couldn't name him even. I think his name was Chambers. Um, Let me double check that because I don't want to get that wrong. But I think it was Chambers. No, it was Michael Collins. Ha! Michael Collins is the one who went on Apollo 11, and he was the one who was on to see. I first read the book, and I forgot the guy's name. I got the C right, but not the Collins, Michael Collins. And that's the thing. We have lost interest in going to the moon because we did it. We won the race with the Soviet Union, and then it became immediately a lot less interesting. The only other mission that people really know much about is Apollo 13, and that's the one where just as they were, what happened is just as they were leaving Earth or atmosphere, just as they were getting to the Earth orbit, they were struck by lightning twice. And this blew up something on the side of the command module, and they didn't know it. And they had to figure out how to survive. By the time they realized that they were damaged, they were already so close to the moon that they had no choice but to continue going to the moon. But they went to the moon, they boarded